Okay.
goes red. Bueno, what's the time? Okay, we have 1 minute left.
Okay.
We'll start 3:30 sharp. Okay? No, just kidding. Bueno, vamos a iniciar el congreso, el 9º congreso del mito en las artes, y le comentaba a Richard ahora que le he pedido permiso para cambiar la presentación. Le pedimos que nos enviara, como a todos vosotros, una pequeña noticia biográfica, pero no la vamos a leer porque no don't look at me like that. Porque su nombre habla por sí mismo. No hay que, es una de las personas que más sabe de mitos griegos en la actualidad. Y que creo que con eso es más que suficiente. Aparte es muy buena persona, cosa que es aún mejor. No sé si es mejor persona que investigador. Creo que eso es bastante más importante. Pero ahora lo que sí que quiero decir, con esto termino, es que es un verdadero privilegio y un verdadero honor estar aquí y presentarle, porque como ya digo, es una de las personas que más conoce el mito griego. Es uno de esos, hay pocos alumnos hoy, es una pena, pero sería de estos nombres que siempre salen referidos en todos los artículos y libros que leéis. Bueno, pues aquí lo tenéis en persona y, mira, casualidad, ha sido de nombrarlo y entran. Y os dejo con él, con Richard Buxton. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, thank you, Alex, for your kind words. And thank you, all of you, for your invitation to participate in such a wonderful event in this wonderful part of the world. Of course, as the name Tartalo reminds us, the Basque country has its own fascinating mythology, which is rooted, like every mythology, in the landscape where the myths are told. A landscape of mountains, caves, pasture land, farms, mines, and the sea. But not, I think, islands. By contrast, in the land to which I shall take you this afternoon, islands play an absolutely fundamental part in mythology. Over the past 4,000 years, the Greek islands have experienced massive changes caused by everything from earthquakes and tsunamis to colonization by a sequence of foreign powers. The 19th century Greek independence movement offered potential for greater freedom. But we need only think of, for instance, the regime of the Greek colonels, the partition of Cyprus, and the refugee crisis in Lesbos, not to mention the effects of mass tourism, to realize that acute humanitarian tensions have never been far away. But amid these continuing episodes of turmoil, something else has continued, and that is the presence of islands in the retelling of myths. These retellings in antiquity and ever since have involved a mixture of real islands and imaginary islands. Real islands such as Lemnos, where Philoctetes was abandoned by the Greeks, or Crete, where the Minotaur lived. Imaginary islands, such as the home of the Sirens, or Circe's island of Aiaia, or Kalokeri, where the sun always shines. But the contrast between the real and the imaginary is complicated. unarguably real islands were the scene of events which belong to the imaginario, the extraordinary exploits of gods, heroes, and monsters. On the other hand, imaginary islands have repeatedly been identified, more or less plausibly, with real islands. How many television programs have been devoted to this subject? Speaking for myself, I find the question, where was the imaginary island of X really located? Very boring. It's true that there are many features of Greek mythology where we can find convincing correspondences between the real world and the imaginary world. For example, the idea of the mythical labyrinth on Cretan Knossos might have been inspired by the sight of the ruined foundations of the actual royal palace. But the problem with the real-world correspondence approach to myths is that it risks diverting attention from what really matters. What makes a myth is not the fact that it reflects the real world, but the way that it transforms that world, turning it into something that is always memorable and frequently astonishing. This is true of all the Greek myths, but it's particularly true of the myths of the islands. Generalizing about the island myths. Myths about the Greek islands involve many themes. First, mythical islands are places of instability. Delos began as a floating island and only later was anchored to the ocean floor. The island of Rhodes rose to the surface from beneath the waves. Nissyros was a piece of rock thrown by Poseidon, which turned into an island. In fact, a scholiast on Apollonius of Rhodius Argonautica reports that in olden times all the islands were wandering. Another aspect of instability concerns multiplicity of names. This applies to dozens of islands and reflects repeated changes in ownership, how the islands were perceived, or mythical events that happened there. Rhodes used to be called Ophiusa, Snake Island, but was renamed Telchinis after the crafty magical folk called Telchines who took up their residence there. Ikaria used to be called Doliche, Long Island, but was renamed because Icaros was washed up there after falling out of the sky. To be an islander is to be subject to instability. A second recurrent theme is that of isolation and confinement. Philoctetes was exiled on Lemnos. Odysseus was detained on Ogygia. Daedalus and Icarus were imprisoned on Crete. In the Odyssey, the island of Aiolos is a place of multiple incest between brothers and sisters, introversion caused by isolation. A third theme is paradoxically the opposite of isolation. I'm calling it connectivity. Mythical narratives repeatedly describe interconnections between one island and another. The Phaeacians of Scheria are sea travellers par excellence, as are the Cretan thalassocrats. The Argonauts, like Odysseus, travelled from one island to another. The giant Orion could cross the sea without the need for a ship, either by walking on it or by wading through it. His wanderings took him from Chios to Lemnos, back to Chios, and then to Crete. A fourth theme is that of utopia. Scheria, inhabited by the Phaeacians, is one such place. So, up to a point, is Calypso's Ogygia. So are the islands of the blessed, where the souls of fortunate heroes go after their death. All these themes deserve investigation. But today, I want to consider yet another theme, the various types of love, eros, that take place on the islands. I choose this theme because it gives me an ideal opportunity to explore the focus of our Tartalo event, the relation between myth and art. There are many islands whose myths evoke love, but I have time for just 4: Kythera, Cyprus, Naxos, and Lesbos. Several Greek islands claimed close ties with a particular divinity. In the case of Kythera, which lies off the southeast promontory of the Peloponnese, the divinity is Aphrodite. ¿Me entienden más o menos mi inglés? Más o menos. Vale. Vamos por ello. Pausanias describes the sanctuary of Aphrodite as the most ancient of all her shrines among the Greeks. In myth, the connection with Kythera goes back to Aphrodite's birth. She was engendered by an act which combined raw sex with extreme violence. Uranos tried to prevent any attempt by his children to overthrow him. As soon as they were born, he pushed them back inside the body of his consort Gaia. But Gaia conspired with her youngest son Kronos to stop this horrific abuse. When Uranos prepared yet again to penetrate Gaia, Kronos castrated him with a sickle and threw the genitals away. Where drops of blood fell onto the ground, they generated furies, giants, and nymphs. But the genitals themselves ended up in the sea. The poet Hesiod takes up the story. About the genitals, a white foam grew from the immortal flesh, and in it a girl formed. First she approached holy Kythera. Then from there she came to sea-girt Cyprus, and out stepped a modest and beautiful goddess. Gods and men call her Aphrodite because she was formed in foam, Aphros, and Kytherea because she approached Kythera, and Cyprus born because she was born in wave-washed Cyprus. The birth of Aphrodite was often portrayed in antiquity by both Greeks and Romans under the name of Venus, and has been repeatedly reimagined since then by artists as various as Sandro Botticelli, William Morris, Odilon Redon, and Andy Warhol. Although not all these reimaginings locate the goddess's origin on Kythera, the link with this island proliferates in the post-classical tradition. The catalyst for this proliferation is the extraordinary novel Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, attributed to the monk Francesco Colonna and published in Venice in 1499. Venice, the city which ruled Kythera for 600 years. Colonna's novel describes the love between Polyphilo and Polia as an allegorical journey through labyrinths and cemeteries, culminating in Venus' temple on Kythera, a place of fertility, harmony, and sensuality. The whole island exudes sexual imagery, climaxing in the concentric circles of the goddess's perfumed garden, topography as sex. Colonna's novel had a huge influence, especially in many theatrical and operatic works from 17th century France. Kythera is the ultimate erotic destination, partly comparable with the Germanic Venusberg. To arrive at Kythera became a euphemism for to come to orgasm. But it wasn't all pleasure. By the end of the Ancien Régime, the phrase la maladie de Cythère had become another euphemism for syphilis. Not all evocations of Cythera were so sexually explicit. There's a more understated approach in L'Embarquement pour Cythère by Jean-Antoine Watteau. Most of the couples are in a state of genteel self-absorption, especially the pair at the far right, next to the garlanded statue of Venus. The 19th century painter Pierre Nolasque Bergeret recalled that this aristocratic ambience became a target, literally, during the French Revolution, when students of drawing threw pieces of bread at Watteau's painting, and students of sculpture threw lumps of clay. A much darker picture was evoked by Charles Baudelaire in his poem Un voyage à Cythère. Quelle est cette île triste et noire? C'est Cythère, nous dit-on, un pays fameux dans les chansons, Eldorado banal de tous les vieux garçons. Regardez, après tout, c'est une pauvre terre. Mais voilà qu'en rasant la côte d'assez près, pour troubler les oiseaux avec nos voiles blanches, nous vîmes que c'était un gibet à 3 branches, du ciel se détachant en noir, comme en cyprès. De féroces oiseaux perchés sur leur pâture détruisaient avec rage un pendu déjà mûr, chacun plantant comme un outil son bec impur, dans tous les coins saignant de cette pourriture. More recently, Cythera has continued to grip the imagination, as in Theodoros Angelopoulos' atmospheric 1984 movie, Voyage to Cythera. By contrast, the marketing gurus of the Hermès franchise have invented a fragrance that they call un jardin à Cythère. Are they implicitly taking their customers back to maybe Watteau, or perhaps to the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, or even, God willing, to Hesiod? It would be nice to think so. As you remember, Hesiod states that the newly born Aphrodite headed from Cythera to wave-washed Cyprus. There was also a more precise location on Cyprus with which she was connected, her sanctuary at Paphos, on the southwest coast of the island. The shrine was famous already in the Odyssey, after Ares and Aphrodite had been caught in flagrante by Hephaestus. The adulterers went their separate ways, he to Thrace and she to Paphos. Again, when Aphrodite wanted to pamper herself before making love with Anchises, as described in the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, it was to the same shrine on Paphos that she took herself for a massage by the Graces. Myths about Cyprus repeatedly focus on the erotic, which brings us to a sequence of myths retold in Ovid's Metamorphoses. The internal narrator at this point in the poem is Orpheus. In his grief at having lost his wife Eurydice twice, Orpheus avoids the theme of Eros in heterosexual marriage and turns first to myths about boys loved by male gods, and then to myths about women who loved or were loved in some way unnaturally. Among these tales is the disturbing story of the Cypriot king Cinyras, his daughter Myrrha, and their son Adonis. When Myrrha desired Cinyras, her self-revulsion drove her to prepare to hang herself. But her nurse convinced her to indulge her desires in the dark, concealing her identity from her father. But eventually the truth came out. The horrified Cinyras was about to kill his daughter, but Myrrha, now pregnant, fled and wandered for 9 months. At last she begged the gods to change her shape, since she considered herself to be despicable in the form of a woman. Transformed into a myrrh tree, she gave birth to Adonis. When he grew up, he was so handsome that he aroused the passion of Venus herself. But the affair was short-lived. A wild boar gored him to death while he was hunting in, where else? Cyprus. Ovid's Orpheus also narrated another erotic myth set in Cyprus. This time, the protagonist is the sculptor Pygmalion. The preceding narrative context in Ovid is a tale about a group of Cypriot women, the Propoitides, who denied the divinity of Venus. In her fury, the goddess first drove them to prostitute themselves and later eternalized their shamelessness by turning them to flint. Revolted by this example, Pygmalion at first rejected women altogether, like Orpheus, but then sculpted his ideal woman out of ivory, static, chaste, modest. She was in every way the opposite of the Propoitides. And of course he fell in love with it, her, fantasizing a real human relationship by adorning the statue and laying it down invitingly on a bed. On a festival day for Venus, he prayed to the goddess to have as his wife a woman like his statue. The statue came alive, and 9 months later gave birth to a baby girl called Paphos. It's usually unwise to reduce the myths of a Greek island to a simple formula. Even so, to summarize the imaginary profile of Cyprus as that of a love island makes some sense. But this erotic reputation was not to everybody's taste. In the opinion of the Christian theologian Clement of Alexandria, Aphrodite was merely a Cypriot prostitute. What a contrast with the approach of the Roman poet Claudian in his Epithalamium, celebrating the marriage of the Emperor Honorius to Maria, the daughter of a Roman military commander. Claudian tells how the god Amor travelled to the palace of Venus on a remote mountaintop in Cyprus to tell her of Honorius' desires. Sitting on her glittering throne, Venus lets the Graces arrange her hair. One of them pours nectar over it, a second wields an ivory comb, a third braids the divine ringlets. As if all this were not enough to situate the place within the world of the Imaginario, the unreality of its location is completed when the mountain is said simultaneously to overlook the Ionian Sea and to face the Nile Delta. Despite such imaginary geography, the poem wonderfully anticipates the pleasures of the impending marriage between Honorius and Maria, and the origin of this joy is Cyprus. From the medieval period onwards, tales about Cyprus as Love Island have proliferated. In the case of Adonis, many major literary and artistic works have reimagined the story. The list includes Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis, Marino's huge epic La Donna, and a play by Lope de Vega, Adonis y Venus. Among musical landmarks is an opera by Tomás de Torrejón y Velasco with libretto by no less than Pedro Calderón de la Barca, La Púrpura de la Rosa. In art, Veronese, Carracci, Rubens, Titian, Poussin, and dozens of others have warmed to the passion and the tragedy of the subject. The myth of Pygmalion has also generated countless reimaginings. The emphasis usually falls on the miraculous coming to life of an inert object created by a male sculptor, or by extension, on other acts of improvement performed by a man on a naive and at first submissive woman. A modern landmark is George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion, with its musical movie spin-off My Fair Lady. In the visual arts, hundreds of images have recreated the statue's warming into life and the sculptor's astonishment at the transformation. I particularly like Honoré Daumier's comic version. If he's not my favourite artist, I don't know who is, where the former statue bends down to take of Pygmalion's snuff, in Espanol creo el rapé. Given its assertion of the power of a man to shape a female body to fulfill his own desires, it's not surprising that the myth has lent itself not just to reworkings, but also to reversals. In her poem Pygmalion's Bride, Carol Ann Duffy gave the ex-statue a strongly feminist voice. But not all the reversals have been imagined by women. The surrealist influence artist Paul Delvaux portrayed a living woman embracing the statue of a man. Presumably, the truncated arm of the statue denotes Mr. Venus de Milo. In regard to both Adonis and Pygmalion, few post-classical retellings stress the myth's location in Cyprus. Instead, they concentrate on the universal implications of the passions which the myths evoke. Like so many myths of the Greek islands, those set on Cyprus possess a resonance which invites them to be transposed far beyond their local birthplace, to explore shared human experience. After Cythera and Cyprus, Naxos. When Theseus had killed the Minotaur on Crete, he sailed away with Ariadne to escape the anger of Minos. They were heading for Theseus' home in Athens, where a harmonious future seemed to await them. But happy endings are rare in Greek myth. En route, the couple stopped at Naxos. Most narrators and artists agreed that this was where Theseus deserted Ariadne as she lay sleeping. But the emotional pendulum would swing once again. Ariadne was rescued by Dionysus, who took her as his bride. So far, so apparently simple, but there are numerous variations offering radically different interpretations of the morality of the episode. One strand of opinion alleged that Ariadne hanged herself after her abandonment, perhaps because Theseus had fallen in love with another woman. Another version, more favourable to Theseus and narrated by a Cypriot author, suggested that the ship carrying the couple from Crete had been driven ashore by a storm to Cyprus, where Theseus put the pregnant Ariadne ashore because she was seasick. Theseus' ship was blown out to sea again, and when eventually he returned, he found that Ariadne had died in childbirth. Grief-stricken, he organised rituals in Cyprus in her honour. The people of Naxos, by contrast, were keen to stress the role of their own island rather than that of Cyprus. On one such Naxian view, the contrasting emotions aroused by the myth could be ingeniously accounted for because there were actually two Ariadnes. One married Dionysus on Naxos, the other was abandoned by Theseus and died on Naxos. There are even more variants which we don't have time to go into, but all of them imagine Naxos as a place of acute emotional turmoil in the relationships between the sexes. The Ariadne-Theseus-Dionysus myth has fascinated readers and viewers at many periods of its reception. Catullus exploited it brilliantly in his longest poem, ostensibly devoted to evoking the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. The poem actually focuses on Ariadne, Theseus, and Bacchus, whose story is woven onto a coverlet spread over the marriage bed. Ariadne pours out her reproaches to the treacherous and now absent Theseus. "So you've left me, you traitor. me taken from my family, altars, you traitor on a deserted beach, Theseus. But soon comes rescue. Then, swooping from somewhere, came Bacchus in his prime, seeking you, Ariadne, aflame with love for you. The scene was a favorite with visual artists. Tengo un texto de 14 páginas y ligado a la página 11. Vale. The scene was a favorite with visual artists. A moving representation of Ariadne's grief is that by the Swiss painter Angelika Kaufmann. As for Bacchus' triumph, images of his Naxian wedding adorned palaces all over Renaissance Italy. In literature, countless writers have found inspiration in the sequence of grief and triumph on Naxos. Not all the retellings have been serious. Boccaccio ascribes Theseus' desertion of Ariadne to the fact that she got drunk on the excellent Naxian wine. But later writers take the story into deeper ethical waters. Opera has been a prime context for exploring Ariadne's transition from lamentation to joy. For instance, Monteverdi's L'Arianna. Better known today is Richard Strauss's Ariadne auf Naxos. A virtuoso interweaving of two musical entertainments played before a rich Viennese client. One of them is a performance of the myth which the opera's title announces. The other is a burlesque song and dance show. In the end, Ariadne and Bacchus, who has arrived on Naxos after a thoroughly unclassical encounter with Circe, sing a love duet and rise to the heavens. And if the tenor is Jonas Kaufmann, who cares? We've already looked at several kinds of erotic relationships on the islands, between a goddess and a male mortal, Aphrodite and Adonis, between a god and a female mortal, Dionysus and Ariadne, between a mortal man and his mortal wife, Theseus and Ariadne, between a man and his daughter, Cinyras and Myrrha, between a man and his artistic creation, Pygmalion and the statue. Not so far, though, love between a couple of the same sex. So it's time we set sail for Lesbos. Today, Lesbos has become synonymous between love between women. Can we trace this back to ancient mythology? The answer is complicated, because what is striking is the variety of types of sexual experience and other experience associated with Lesbos. In the Iliad, there are repeated references to Lesbos as the site of male against female sexual aggression. When Agamemnon wanted to persuade Achilles to rejoin the battle, he promised to present the hero with 7 beautiful women, whom he had chosen from those captured by Achilles during a raid on Lesbos. Achilles consoled himself by sleeping with a girl from Lesbos named Diomede, presumably captured on the same raid. Another act of sexual aggression against a woman was perpetrated by a king of Lesbos named Epopeus, who raped his own daughter, Nyctimene. When she hid in a forest out of shame, Athene took pity on her and turned her into an owl, a bird which only shows itself at night. Nyctimene means she who stays out at night. A very different kind of heterosexual relationship on Lesbos concerns the poet Sappho and a handsome young man called Phaon. Since Phaon rejected her, the story culminates in Sappho's suicide leap from a cliff on another island, an island for another lecture, Lefkada. This anecdote is about a real historical woman, but it has mythical overtones as well. Phaon was also the name of an old man who, it was said, used to ferry people from Lesbos to Asia Minor. One day he ferried the goddess Aphrodite, who had disguised herself as an old woman. Phaon refused to accept payment, and in gratitude, Aphrodite turned him into an incredibly handsome young man. By linking Sappho with a young lover called Phaon, the story modulates from the biography of a historical figure into the world of myth, another example of the complex boundary between the real and the imaginary. So far, all our examples of sex on Lesbos have concerned heterosexuality. What of same-sex relationships? A story which seems to be relevant concerns an Amazon queen called Myrina, who founded a settlement on Lesbos and named it after her sister Mytilene. In modern times, the Amazons have often been promoted as an icon for lesbian love. But the ancient myths associated with the Amazons are multiple and themselves complex. Some traditions stated that although Amazonian society was all female, in order to regenerate the community, the women also met up periodically with males. Also, several myths mention individual Amazons who had erotic feelings for men, most famously Penthesilea for Achilles. So we can't assume that the episode of the Amazons on Lesbos necessarily implied female homoeroticism. Where then does the modern association between Lesbos and lesbianism come from? It originates with the poet Sappho, the wonderful celebrator of love between women. Even so, we shouldn't exaggerate the connection between Lesbos and poetry written about and composed by women. Sappho's predecessor, the Kythera player Terpander, and her contemporary, the lyric poet Alkaios, were both real historical men born on Lesbos. And there are two more male musicians who have connections with Lesbos. Both of them inhabit the world of myth, in one case partly, in another case completely. They are Orion and Orpheus. The singer Orion was allegedly saved by a music-loving dolphin who was swimming nearby when the crew of a ship threw him into the sea. As for Orpheus, after having been decapitated by Thracian Maenads, his head floated down a Thracian river until it came ashore at Lesbos, where it allegedly gave prophetic utterances. In other words, Lesbos in antiquity had a strong connection both in real life and in myth with music and poetry performed by men, just as strong, if not stronger, than the connection between the island and female homoeroticism. It's above all in the modern imagination that Lesbos has become identified with female homoeroticism. Here is Baudelaire again. Lesbos, terre des nuits chaudes et langoureuses, qui font à leur miroir stérile volupté. Les filles aux yeux creux de leur corps amoureuse caressent les fruits mûrs de leur nubilité. Lesbos, terre des nuits chaudes et langoureuses. Modern artists too have developed the theme, notably Simeon Solomon in his Sappho and Irina in a garden at Mytilene, celebrating a physical embrace between two female poets. But it's female writers who have taken the lead, such as Colombian-born Tatiana de la Tierra in her Dreaming of Lesbos. I quote, "I can enter the morning with traces of an eternal dream, to live on a planet of women. We sing in the fertile forest, caress on lavender hills, bathe beneath cascades of clear waters. I've been trying to suggest how rich and varied were myths about love set on 4 Greek islands, and how perceptions of those myths have changed over time. I hope also that I've encouraged you to think about some theoretical issues, especially that involving the real and the imaginary. And maybe also my remarks have revealed another kind of passion, my own passion for the Greek islands, both real and imaginary. If I've been able to transmit just a little of that passion to you, I've achieved my objective. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias. Eskerrik asko.
Eskerrik asko, Richard. ¿Alguna pregunta tenéis? Venga, no seáis tímidos. Que si no, os saco yo mañana al encerado, alguno. Venga.
Sí, pues en euskera no lo entiendo, pero español más o menos, si no, hay muchas personas que van a hacer la traducción, ¿no?
No questions? I got a question anyhow. But...
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. So, sorry for my English. I will try, and if you don't understand, I will try again in Spanish.
Perfecto.
So, I was thinking about how interesting is the place where things take place in the myth. I mean, all those myths are related with love and with island. I was thinking also in Styros, or Skiros, also the place, the island where Achilles and Deidamia were in touch, so they met.
Of course, we could go on all afternoon and many other afternoons if we brought in all of the islands which have some connection or other with love. There's a little island off the southeastern coast of the Peloponnese called Kranae, a tiny little island where honeymoon couples to this day go to be married. And in mythology, it was said to be the island where Paris and Helen spent their first night together. But naturally, because Greek islanders are very proud of their own islands, there were also other islands which claimed to be the place where Paris and Helen slept together for the first time. But I think it was Kranae.
What a night.
But yes, of course, you're quite right in what you say. And we could have dwelt on Crete for a week. And we could have gone into various different places. But I had to select something, and for better or worse, that was what I chose anyway.
And why it is? Is there any explanation? I mean, maybe because islands are not the earth are not water. They are in between place.
Well, that's a very nice comment, a good comment. It's a possibility. The problem is, I wanted to focus on islands, but I could also have said these things happen too on the mainland. But certain kinds of erotic experience perhaps belong in isolation. A couple wants to be or is represented as being separate from the world, although at the same time they may be involved in a connectivity because you have to get to the island and you have to leave it. But for the duration of that assignation or whatever it might be, perhaps confinement is the most important thing. Seclusion, isolation. After all, the Italian for island is isola. Isolación, insulación, es todo un concepto integral. But that's just a thought.
Thank you for your marvelous talk. With these last thoughts you shared, I was thinking about a TV show I saw recently, The White Lotus. And I was thinking about this idea of seclusion, isolation you talked about, and about the forbidden love of infidelity. Because there is this kind of situation where we don't know if a couple of, if two people that are not in a relationship together they have sex while their couple stays in mainland. And I was wondering about these kind of connections of islands that sometimes are connected to the mainland through a path that disappears with the sea, if this is something that appears to in these kind of myths, or if there is a specific connection to infidelity and this kind of seclusion, secrets.
Excuse me.
Yeah, if there was anything that you could share about this specific idea of the atemporality and this parallel space that is created in these temporary islands.
This is another aspect of, if you like, instability, because there are many ancient sources that talk about how this had once been an island, but it was now joined to the mainland. Lefkada is a perfect example, where you can now walk across a causeway from the island to the mainland and vice versa. At the same time, you can sail underneath. And in antiquity, there were many such places, because Greece being such a geologically unstable place, the location of the coastline vis-a-vis an island is often very variable. Some islands are produced by alluvial deposits as well, which means that an island can grow where there was no island before. But you're right in pointing out this link between mainland and island as being a fundamental feature, certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? I had one, but you already answered it. It was about
let's have it again.
about the instability of the island, the idea of instability. But you already answered that.
But this you find in all kinds of authors. You find Strabo is the geographer Strabo insists a great deal on the variability of the Greek landscape, not necessarily in relation to mythology, but as it were to geography and geology. All these things weave one into another. One can't say, with all respect to the Tartalo conference about myth, myth is not an isolated category. Myth is integrated with other ways of perceiving the world, today and in antiquity. It was integrated with geography, with history, with geology, to name only a few. And you find geologists, geographers, historians, as well as tragedians and epic poets describing this instability. Homeric hymns, you find different emphases according to context, but still a large overlap between so-called mythological narratives and other kinds of narrative.
Okay, I have been trying to get the connection with the four elements, the four topics you explained about the islands, the instability, utopia, and love. I was trying to connect it with the idea of Kythera, Cyprus. It was going, it's a step of the way, one of it, the connection between that. But because at the beginning I was thinking maybe it's instability and love stories, but
I don't know whether that will work, Alex, actually.
No, it's not working. That's it's not working.
Maybe we both need to go away and think about it.
Yeah.
No, it didn't occur to me that. But we'll think it over anyway.
Yeah. Because I was trying to also I mean, Marie Carmen already asked you this. Why these 4 islands? I was trying to, because you go from the mainland to the other mainland. You go from continental Greece to what used to be Greece that is not Greece anymore because it's Turkey nowadays. I was trying to make that journey, stepping on the 4 topics you talked.
This comes down to connectivity, doesn't it? That the islands are a way of getting more easily from one place on the mainland to another than staying on the mainland. So they can be a place of communication, or they can be a place where communication is impossible because of isolation. This is why this is a very sad fact about not exactly recent Greek history, but fairly recent Greek history, that an island such as Leros and Gyaros as well have been used as prison islands. Prison not only for political prisoners, but also for those deemed to be mentally unsound. And this is certainly within living memory. So that is very much an island conceived as a prison. That is ultra confinement, ultra insulation and isolation. So there are very sad aspects of being on an island, as well as romantic aspects. And mythology and real life both incorporate both of those ideas.
Any more questions? No? Then thank you very much, Richard.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
very much.
Thank you. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Bueno, vamos bien de tiempo.
Sí,
Oh, very well.
claro.